But anyway, so this is a symposium piece. This is called What Kinds of Practice Are Necessary for Self-Consciousness by Haley Brennan. And this is in the Canadian Journal of Philosophy. So as a symposium piece, I didn't realize this, but like that's cool. But like they must have been talking about something. We'll find out what it is. And a lot of times this is an overview. So here we go. And as always, my first time reading it. Feel free to ask questions. I don't endorse anything in this philosophy, of course, but I will do my best to answer them. Let me know. The Practical Self is a book that, as the title suggests, engages with the practical. Okay, so we're talking about said book, The Practical Self. What is not contained in the title, but is compellingly illustrated in Anil Gomes' text, is that the focus on practical is threefold. As Gomes argues, maybe I call him Gomez. Anil Gomes or Gomez, I don't know, I apologize, whichever one it is. As Gomez argues, questions about the self are practical because what it is to be self-conscious is tied to recognizing yourself as an agent as opposed to a patient of thought. And I'm picking Gomez from Gomez the Addams Family because Gomez is the man. It's not just because I like the name Gomez, it's because he's the man. Okay. They are practical because this recognition is grounded in practical as opposed to theoretical reasons and requirements. They are practical because these reasons and these requirements are intimately tied to our daily and worldly practices. Okay, so we're getting a very Aristotelian actually flavored thing going on here because Aristotle was always like, habits, and that whatever practices, they're just our habits. Like so, but also it scares me as I see Immanuel Kant referenced up here into the keyword, so who knows. Gomez elegantly weaves together these three senses of practical to motivate, in the spirit of Cartesian and Kantian projects he takes as guiding lights, an account of the relation between the self or self-consciousness and knowledge of an objective world. Motivating such an account to whatever degree we can absent either an appeal to God or an appeal to idealism is Gomez's central concern in the book. We must understand the practical self, argues Gomez, in order to make sense of this as a genuine relation. The text follows this framework. We begin with the self-world relation. Lacking a satisfying account of this relation, we turn to think more about the self-consciousness, our understanding and recognition of it, and it is on properly developing our understanding of our self-consciousness that we can use these considerations to motivate a return to and comprehension of the relation between the self and the world. Okay, so look at how we interact with the world and then we can define what the self is. I worry immediately just off the setup here that we're taking the objective world at face value. Now, I don't know how that's going to work, but it seems very much like this is like it's like return to the world, get back to the world. So what is that? I don't know, but we'll see. Author focuses here on the arguments that take us from each stage to the next. That is the argument that prompts a renewed look at the self and the nature of our self-consciousness, and the argument that takes us from this self back to the world. Each step, as Gomez argues for them, involves a commitment to one of the three kinds of practical that I outlined above. My comments concern the strength and nature of the commitment to the practical in each of these stages. In the first instance, I argue that we do not yet have sufficient motivation to leave behind theoretical or alternative practical grounds for knowledge of our self-consciousness. Yeah, and so this is what I was a little bit concerned about. So how do you actually leave behind theoretical or alternative conceptions of what it is of our knowledge? It's, unless you have a decided epistemology, like something you think this is the way we understand stuff, there's always going to be alternatives. In the second, I ask whether we can strengthen the commitment to worldly practices and the role of community in our account of self-consciousness. See, this is where we're getting something interesting. We've got the role of community here. What is the role of community with respect to self-consciousness? That doesn't immediately strike me as like, oh yeah, self-consciousness, we need a community to define that. Like, that doesn't seem immediate. So what's going on here? A challenge for an account of self-consciousness. The practical self offers an account of the nature of and conditions on being self-conscious subjects, and the way that meeting these conditions relates us, the self-conscious subjects, to an objective world. Gomez argues that self-conscious subjects are required to have faith. a particular kind of practical assent in themselves as the agents of thinking. This faith, in turn, sustained and supported by worldly practices, in particular the practice of holding each other accountable for our views and judgments, hence the relation to the world. Okay, so faith. What kind of faith is really getting called out here? I'm not entirely sure. This is, Alright, we'll have to just keep going. Author says, why do we need an appeal to this faith in order to account for the relation between self-consciousness and objectivity? In the first instance is because our best attempts to offer an account of the connection between the self and the world fall short. Projects like that of Descartes and Kant that aim to secure a genuine relation between self-consciousness and an objective world must rely on controversial metaphysical premises, God or idealism, in order to do so. And as Gomez convincingly argues in chapter 2, strategies that purport to depart from such premises by arguing that the relations need not be a genuine one, that is a relation where each of the relata really exists, but only a relation of internal directedness, are no less complicated and no more successful than the ambitions of Descartes and Kant. We struggle to offer a satisfying explanation of the connection between the self and the world, whether that connection is construed in terms of how the world must actually be, or in terms of how we must experience the world. I mean, it's too bad Luminance isn't here, but like Luminance, of course, would be like, and this is why we don't do that. You don't do the Cartesian self and world thing because that is bad. Because Heideggerians in general say, look, you don't have any coherent Cartesian self. And so this whole Cartesian hangover we've had for the last 500 years or so is misguided. But in this worldview, that of Descartes or Kant, where you have this sort of self-consciousness, you do need to have this dichotomy set up. So there are other ways to go about this, but this is the problem here. Like, if you're going to be like, okay, we have a self-conscious object, what is that? Author says, luckily, there is a way forward. In order to appreciate the solution, though, we must first get a handle on a problem for the nature of self-consciousness. This problem comes from Lichtenberg, who contends that an isolated self-conscious thinker lacks the resources to even formulate I am thinking. In Lichtenberg's own words, quote, we become conscious of certain representations that do not depend on us. Others, at least we believe, depend on us. Where is the boundary? We know only the existence of our sensations, representations, and thoughts. One should say it is thinking, just as one says it is lightning. To say cogito is already too much as soon as one translates it as I am thinking. Yeah. So this is not a new thing where it's not a new criticism of the cogito that says you don't have any idea of what an I is. It's just that something exists in I think, therefore I am. Well, something is making some sort of whatever thinking is, and therefore something exists. There is no I necessarily. You can't guarantee that it's you. It's just something that may be happening to you, but that doesn't mean you exist. That means something exists, and that something is doing this thing. Gomez insightfully shows that Lichtenberg's challenge should be understood as the claim that the thinker lacks the resources to distinguish between thoughts in which she is the agent and thoughts in which she is the patient. There is no principle available to her to demarcate thoughts that are determined externally and strike her as if a bolt of lightning from those thoughts for which she is at least the partial determining ground. Call this Lichtenberg's challenge for self-consciousness. Self-consciousness depends on the subject recognizing themselves as the agent of their thinking. Okay, so this is where it's going then. It says, if you want to have an I, then you need to have a you, or at least something that's not me. So, which we'll just call a generic you or some other they, them, whatever else is out in the world. Like, I feel like this is not like this Lichtenberg quote from 2012. Like, this is an old criticism, but they're just attributing it to Lichtenberg. It seems a little funky. I think maybe even Kant mentioned it himself. I don't remember. But yeah. But this is where the social's coming in, where to say I am thinking, the I part needs a you part. And as soon as you do the you, that makes a social system of some sort. Why solipsists? Yeah. basically. So there's no guarantee that, like, when you have the Kogito dojo that says I think therefore I am, well, what's guaranteeing you that it's an I? Maybe something is just like, turning a crank, and like that turning the crank like makes this sort of think therefore I am thing go. Now, the idea that there's an I versus a you need to be able to define I and you. And so the idea there is that, yeah, you have to get out of the solipsism somehow. And this is going to be a social solution to that by saying, okay, you can only really understand your thinking in a social context. Yes, Vipers. Yes, that's right. Not the first time you've made it, but it's still good. It's still good. Just a little dusty. Okay. Continuing. This claim immediately needs both specifying and qualifying because Gomez argues that it is only a particular form of self-consciousness, what he calls deliberative self-consciousness, that is in contention on Lichtenberg's challenge. I would expect nothing less, Vipers. Basic self-consciousness, the ability to recognize your thoughts and experiences as your own, is possible even absent the thought of oneself as the agent of these thoughts and experiences. Deliberative self-consciousness, on the other hand, is both the recognition of your own thoughts and experiences, parsed as your own perspective, and the thinking of the subject of that perspective as the possible agent of mental activity. This kind of self-consciousness is really what is at the heart of our philosophical projects, since it is the kind of self-consciousness that is evidenced or actualized in conscious and comprehended evaluation of our perspective. Yeah, so you want it to be like, this is mine. This is my consciousness. Not just that something is conscious. This is my consciousness. It is this deliberative self-consciousness that would not be possible, Gomez argues, if we did not take ourselves to the agent, to be the agent of thinking. This gives us the version of Lichtenberg's challenge, which Gomez is concerned with responding. In order to explain our deliberative self-conscious thought, we must account for how and why we are epistemically entitled to recognize ourselves as the agents of our thinking. The remainder of Gomez's argument takes this as a jumping-off point as follows. On such an understanding of the challenge, it becomes clear that the only way to account for this condition on self-consciousness is by appeal to practical reason. And it is this appeal to practical reason that makes available a new source of connection between self-consciousness and objectivity. The problem or puzzle of the relation between self-consciousness and the world is solved in virtue of resolving this challenge. I turn now to the details of the first of these steps. How do and can we justify the claim, I am the agent of my thinking? Dojo asks, is the agency that makes it your possession? No, because I think they mentioned very quickly in passing above that an agent could recognize something else existing. So it's not just the agency, because you could recognize something else as existing and be like, oh, something exists. That doesn't immediately give you self-reflection that you also exist if you are the one recognizing that something else exists. The statement, there is something out there, can be sort of free-floating, like in the abstract. So how do you actually get the I am the thing recognizing something going on? That's a different question. So just the agency is not enough. If that didn't make sense, let me know. Try again. 2. Is practical assent the only way forward? I call the claim that I am the agent of my thinking the agential claim. Gomez considers 4 options for justifying our assent to the agential claim. 1. Experience. 2. A priori conceptual analysis. 3. Transcendental arguments. 4. Practical assent. 1 through 3 are presented as grounds rooted in theoretical reason. 4 is rooted in practical reason. So practical assent, whatever that means then. Gomez argues in both the end of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4 that this set of theoretical justificatory options will not meet the challenge. Theoretical grounds cannot justify my entitlement to hold that I am the agent of my thinking. Okay. Yeah, the theoretical stuff, it just is not enough. Yeah, I mean, on the abstract, there's no reason to get that will guarantee you that you exist just in abstraction. Given this, the only available route is 4, explaining how our recognition of ourselves as the agent of our thinking is a form of practical assent. In doing so, we follow Lichtenberg's own prescription that, quote, to assume the I, to postulate it, is a practical requirement, end quote. Our status as the agents of our thinking, Gomez argues, as a matter of faith, that is, it is a matter of particular kind of technical and significant practical assent. Doger says, as a 55-year-old, I seem to have more moments that I don't have full control of, where I'm in auto mode, unthinking action. Yeah, and that is a recognized thing in a lot of this literature, where you might think like when you're young that you're doing everything, but then you start to realize, no, you're not thinking about, especially things like breathing. A lot of times there's like automated things in your body. But even though as you get older, like a lot of us, like I drive to work every day. Do you remember your drive to work every day? Were you paying attention every time? It's like, no, this happens to everyone who's driving a regular route. You sort of blank out and just drive on autopilot and realize you weren't thinking about driving at all for a little bit, but you were driving just fine. And so this is a very common thing. And I guess you notice it more when you get older, just because you've gotten so good at things. And so you don't have to think like consciously. You don't have to put effort into it. So yeah, but like this is definitely in the background, and I'm pretty sure even like someone like Aristotle would have noted this back in ancient Greece. Like even they had this sort of thing, like where a master worker no longer thinks about the menial tasks as they do it. They just do the work really fast and they don't think about it. So you don't even need modern tech. Like even just, putting stuff together back in the day, you could think of like basket weaving. You could just do stuff like with your hands in auto mode. Cooking sometimes. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you're not even thinking about it. You've cooked this thing a bunch of times before. You're stirring. You're not even thinking about stirring. It happens. And there's no problem with it, but it is an interesting phenomenon when you are considering a gentle responsibility. You weren't thinking, but you were still doing. So yeah. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so they're calling this a matter of faith, which is kind of interesting, but it's really what they're calling a matter of faith is a particular kind of technical and practical assent. So, not doing what I want, but all right, there, good enough. Douglas says drumming is often releasing of intention, but a bass reaction. Yeah. So playing music, another good one too. And Prof was in stream earlier. And like he writes on this sort of stuff, knowing what like something is, and then knowing how to do it, and knowing how to do something is a kind of like it. You might not, just because you know how to do it doesn't mean you can know how to explain it, or like you just know, if you know how to play an instrument, you can do it, not necessarily thinking about it. That is what know-how comes down to. So this is kind of his area. Okay, the kind is technical because it necessarily depends on two conditions. It is significant because the content of both of these conditions is quite demanding. One has practical reasons to assent to a claim if and only if both of the following are met. So this is claim 1. The claim is theoretically undecidable. Quote, there could not be theoretical reasons to endorse or deny the claim. So it's moot. It's just like an academic question in some sense. So this is why, like, there's no preconceived reason to think one way or the other. So this is you're indifferent. So this is really indifference is this first one. And 2, the claim is practically required. Assenting to the claim is a rational requirement on the pursuit of ends that we are required to set. Okay, so we have to make a decision here. So in some sense, we do not get a choice in making this decision, but we have to come down on one side of this decision, which is not theoretically decidable. You can't figure it out in the abstract. It just could be one or the other. As the author said, both conditions are demanding. The latter appeals to a practical requirement. The former appeals to the impossibility of giving theoretical reasons. That is, it is not sufficient, I take it, to satisfy C1 that I lack theoretical reasons or you lack theoretical reasons, but it must be such that theoretical reasons are in principle unavailable for the claim. Yeah, so it's saying hard empirical. Wait, what about the claim is false? So in claims like that would be ruled out because a lot of those you'd have like say it's you got like a paradox, like you're doing a liar paradox or something. You have a reason to like maybe avoid that because it's a paradoxical statement. And so that, like on your conception of logic, say, well, that I'm just going to treat as false, or you're going to treat it as true. But like that would go with a wider understanding of how you understand logic to work, or formal systems or whatever. So this is something where you just say, I don't know. Paradoxes are, people have feelings about those. This is something that you're supposed to be indifferent towards. I don't think you're indifferent towards a paradox, but it's a good question. But like the whole point is that theoretically undecidable, it says up here. People think that paradoxes are decidable. They just, have philosophical reasons for why one solution is better than another. Like I have my personal preference on what the best way to deal with paradoxes are. And that's like a theoretical claim. This is saying, no, this is not theoretically decidable. This is something like entirely empirical. Like, is it going to rain tomorrow? That's theoretically undecidable. But is it going to rain tomorrow fails this requirement issue, which is number 2, because there's nothing forcing me to make a decision one way or the other about whether it's going to rain. So that's part of the difficulty here, is that it has to be something like empirical, but then you are also forced to make a decision about it. And things that are empirical that we don't know about, why would we ever be forced to make a decision there? That's a very unusual circumstance. And that's what the author is getting into right here. Okay. Gomez discusses a range of worries about the weakening of C2, that is, what would happen if the claim under consideration is not a requirement. This, he writes, would be mere wishful thinking, and offers a range of reasons why the agental claim can meet the condition in its strongest form. Here I ask the same question for C1. Does the agental claim meet the strong version of C1 with its strong version of the theoretical undecidability requirement? You're so confused. All right, well, let me know. Because the claim is false. Like if you say this claim is false or that claim is false, why would you say that? Like if it's just something empirical, sure. Like that could be one way or the other. If you're saying this claim, which I'm saying right here, is false, like a paradox, people have feelings on paradoxes, but there's no one's forcing you to take a stance there. That's the second thing here. The author's saying right here, this arrow bit here, they're saying you have to take a stance, and that's what makes this special. The statement is that things are either undecidable or decidable. No. The claim is that it is in theory, and only in theory, undecidable. Meaning on abstract reason, you have no reason to believe one side or the other. No. Yeah, I don't think it's a false dichotomy. It says it's something that is just given the state of knowledge and like abstract reasoning, you can't decide a priori. It's just saying it's empirical in some sense. Yeah, it's just saying empirical. It's definitely something that would look empirical. They're saying not theoretically. Their claim is theoretically undecidable because they want to actually expand it to realms that are not what's traditionally called empirical, but it's just saying not theoretically decidable. So yeah, it's really just saying empirical with a very wide understanding of empirical. That's all. So I don't think that's particularly weird. It's just an unusually wide version of empirical. Okay. The author says that it's going to fail on this decidability thing. The author says, I argue that it cannot. Let me get one more piece on the table before I do so. As I read it, the following assumption is in the background of Gomez's argument that we must practically assent to the agental claim. The 4 options listed above as reasons for our assent are exhaustive. That is, if the 3 theoretical routes cannot be taken, the only path that lies before us is the path of practical reason, and the only path for practical reason is practical assent, understood as this technical notion of faith. In other words, if we cannot justify our claim via the first 3 routes, then we foreclose knowledge of the claim. Okay. Gomez's claim that we must practically assent to the claim that we are agents of our thinking relies on the fact that A, that we have foreclosed all theoretical options, and B, that the only route for practical justification is practical assent, and that these options are exhausted. I take it both A and B are involving in satisfying C1. Sock now, what's up? Finally, I'm capable of viewing my Twitch transmission. I understand I am parlaying unnaturally, but I am attempting to position my mind in English, was conversing in Spanish. Okay, cool. Hey, appreciate you being here one way or the other. Like, if you want to talk in Spanish, I might understand, I might not, but hey, I understand, you know, like, you're talking in English because that's the only language I speak. You speak more languages. We are not the same. So thank you for being here. Okay, so in what follows, the author challenges each of these in turn. They argue first that there are ways of construing Lichtenberg's challenge and its resultant demand for justification that reintroduces the possibility of theoretical options. Second, that there are ways of construing Lichtenberg's challenge and its resultant demand for justification that introduce alternative practical routes for rational justification. In doing so, I do not aim to present decisive arguments in favor of alternative ways of assenting to the agental claim. My aim instead is to draw attention to the availability of other options for justifying this assent. The availability of these alternative options is, I argue, enough to weaken the satisfaction of a condition that requires that there could not be knowledge-based reasons to endorse or deny the claim in which we have faith. You have two languages in your mind, yeah. Yep, that's what happens. You learn too many things, your brain gets all full. Then to learn anything new, you have to push something else out to get anything new in. It's kind of annoying. Okay, so what we're going to do is argue that maybe there is some theoretical way to decide that you exist. And it's not a question of practicality. That seems like what's going here. Like, because everyone agrees that something exists on the fact that if you say, I think, therefore I am, something happened. We don't know exactly what, but something happened. Do you get to claim that? No, but the author is going to say, well, there might still be some background moves that you can make that gets you the I in I think, therefore I am. Okay, to get a grip on theoretical reasons left overlooked, let us return to the Lichtenberg challenge and return to Gomez's claim that the challenge is only a challenge for a particular form of self-consciousness, namely deliberative self-consciousness. In so arguing, Gomez holds that we can be self-conscious, not deliberately so, absent a grip on ourselves as the agents of our thinking. Because of this, he takes it that theoretical arguments for the basic nature of self-consciousness, either from experience or from concepts, will not suffice to explain the claim that we are agents. I propose that we can understand Lichtenberg's challenge as targeting the fact that we have grounds for assenting to our self-consciousness at all. This strengthens the challenge, but likewise strengthens our response. Here is how this goes. Self-consciousness is the capacity to recognize one's thoughts and experiences as one's own. That is, the self-capacity to recognize your perspective on the world or to self-ascribe experiences. Gomez argues that it is not and cannot be a condition on self-ascription that the subjects think of themselves as the agents of the experience they self-ascribe. I can, for example, take it that my experience of it raining outside or the scrap of a song that just came into my head are happening to me, not generated by me. All that is required for these thoughts is that I take myself to be the location or the unified subject of the experience or thought. Yeah, so you're not making up the rain, it's the rain that's making you think that it's raining because you hear it or whatever. And so you are the subject of the rain sounds that is now you have the experience of hearing the rain. This seems clearly right. You can think of yourself as having an experience without thinking about yourself as the agent of this experience. But I argue this is only one half of the process of self-ascription and only one of two things that we are getting at when we say that someone is self-conscious. Douglas says, I don't even know what exist means or implies, so I just have given up on any proof. Exist is just too sloppy for proof. That's fair. It's fair. Yeah. Would just saying something like worldly, like it's like in the world, would that be better? Because a lot of stuff here, you are just talking about what exists in the world, as opposed to just like some sort of like weird thought stuff. If you just say, well, is worldly or in the world and not exists, maybe that would, because that's usually be enough. Leave it to the philosophers. Yeah, fair. But yeah, so all right, so what they're saying here is you don't have to ascribe it to yourself. It's just, you can be like, it is raining out there, and you don't have to be anything. It's like, this is like, it's such a Cartesian strong break here that it's like between like, oh, you have this thing happening to me, and then there's this outside world or whatever, and something happened in the world, and then I'm the one, I experience it. That's it. So yeah, this seems clearly right that you can think of yourself as having experience without thinking about yourself as the agent of this experience. But okay, they say it's only one half. When you recognize your thoughts as your own, two things are happening. One, there are experiences that you self-ascribe. Two, you are ascribing the experiences to yourself. I can see people getting very angry about this. I can be like, Luminance would be here and be like, no, this is not how you do it. But okay. Stockton says, tenemos un dicho en Puerto Rico, estoy entre jamón y queso un sandwich. So you're in a ham and cheese sandwich? Yeah, you're between a ham and cheese sandwich. Yeah, okay. You know my feelings in Descartes. That's fair, Dojo. Yeah, that's right. You are not a Descartes fan. So this is part of the issue, is that this is a very Cartesian style argument where you've got like your sort of mind stuff and then world stuff here. And it's a hard break. Okay. Yeah, so we're doing two things now. We're having an experience, and then you're also having an experience of ascription to yourself. So there's this to yourself issue here. And while the first does not require that you think of yourself as the agent, the second does. Yeah, so if you think, okay, it's raining and I hear the raining, you don't actually have to think I hear the rain. You can just be like, oh, rain. And then the other one says, well, I hear the rain. And then it's like, well, then you are ascribing the one who is hearing the rain as me. In other words, you can think of yourself as having an experience without thinking about yourself as the agent of the experience. But you do have to think of yourself as the agent of your ascription. You can be the patient of the experience, but insofar as you self-ascribe this experience, you are the agent of the ascription. Yeah, so if I am hearing the rain, then I am mentioning me in that sentence. If what is to be self-conscious is to recognize your perspective, thoughts, and experiences as your own, and what it is to recognize your perspective as your own is to self-ascribe these experiences, and self-ascription involves both the having of the experience and the act of the ascription, then it is not the case that you can be self-conscious without having a grip on yourself as the agent of your thinking. At a minimum, you must recognize yourself as the agent of ascription. To recognize one's thoughts and experiences involves recognizing oneself as the agent of one's thinking. Yeah, so once you start saying, well, I hear it raining, well, then yes, then you are saying I hear it raining. But that's kind of also a little bit, the Bible says this is the way the world is. And it's like, well, how does the Bible know that? Well, the Bible says it. And it's like, okay, well, do we just believe it because the Bible is like self-referring to itself at that point? No, that is one of the sort of like, there's also like, what's it called? There's paradox where you've got like, well, if what I say is true, then the moon is made of green cheese. Well, this is the Curry paradox. And any hypothetical along those lines always comes out true. So then, therefore, the moon is made of green cheese. And it's only a logic trick because if it's true, then the both parts of the hypothetical, the antecedent and the consequent, have to be true. And if it's false, then the first part is true and the second part false, but it says itself that it is true, so that one doesn't matter. So it's like, you can like just be like, well, everything I say is true, therefore the moon is made of green cheese. It's like, no, we are just going to not take your word for it. And taking somebody's word for it, like saying, I am the agent of I think, therefore I am. Well, I don't have to take your word for it. You're just saying I. Okay. I mean, you recognize oneself as the agent of it. It involves recognizing oneself as the agent of one's thinking. Well, I don't have to take your word for it. You can just say you're doing it. And like, you could be a pea zombie or whatever. Okay. Lichtenberg's challenge, then, should be taken in its strongest version. It is a challenge to self-consciousness generally, or what I call basic self-consciousness. Self-consciousness depends on the subject recognizing themselves as the agent of their thinking, insofar as we cannot so recognize, we cannot understand self-consciousness. Okay. In recognizing the strong version of the challenge, though, we should likewise recognize that we might have good and distinctively theoretical grounds for response. Here is one way that the theoretical reasons come back into the picture in this understanding. Dojo says, let's say that I'm a computer and I'm aware of my computer nature, and I'm both aware of my actions but don't have agency. I don't agree with the author. Yeah. So you could be like, well, it was programmed into the computer to say, well, I can like get feedback loops and see my own thinking going on. It's like, okay. Then it's like, well, does that feedback loop immediately make consciousness? Now, fair warning, Dojo, you may be on the side of this author right here, not the author that they're criticizing. So you might actually agree with this person. We have to see where they're going with it right now. Okay. So the author has described this as an inseparably two-part process. One, having an experience that you self-ascribe, and two, being the agent of your ascription. If we accept that one is supported by appeals to ourself as the location or metaphysical subject of thinking, and that one cannot happen without two, then insofar as we have reasons, experiential, conceptual, or transcendental, to accept either the unity or location point, we have reasons to accept the agency point. Yeah, so they may be doing exactly what you're doing, Dojo. Saying just because you have a reason to accept that you are the one thinking, like a computer with a feedback loop that we set up, does that give you consciousness? Probably not. All right, so here's another way that theoretical comes. Here's another way the theoretical reasons come back into view. Denying that we know ourselves to be the agents of our thinking begins to look like a performative contradiction. We are self-conscious, so we are self-ascribing, and we could not self-ascribe if we both were not and did not recognize ourselves to be the agent of thinking. Therefore, we are intelligibly the agents of our thinking. To deny this would be to ascribe a thought to yourself of the form I am not or cannot know that I am the agent of my thinking. That itself involves intelligibly being the agent of your thinking while simultaneously denying to yourself that you are. This point was actually made by my former advisor Hintika in the 1950s. That it's performative when you say I think therefore I am. What's two? Two was being the agent of your ascription. So when you're saying I am the one that's hearing the rain, it's like I'm the one that's doing it. So it's the self-reflexive thing. It's like it's raining and I'm the one hearing it. The two is the I'm the one hearing it bit. The one is that you have an experience that you self-ascribed, and then like you can say, well, I'm the one doing it, but like you are also I am that person. So it's like, yeah. So one is just having experience that you self-ascribe. Like, so someone's hearing the rain and then like, okay, and that one person is specifically me. Like you can say it's me that's having it, but then like I am that person. Whoever that I is. Okay. So, yeah, so I think therefore I am is performative, and that's the point, is that in performing that, you are doing something yourself and you can't deny it because you are the one performing the cogito. As I read it, this is the point at the heart of the passage Gomez cites from Kant's metaphysics lectures. Quote, when I say I think, I act, etc., then either the word I is applied falsely, or I am free. Were I not free, then I could not say I do it, but rather I would have to say I feel in me a desire to do which someone has aroused in me. But when I say I do it, that means spontaneity in the transcendental sense. But now I am conscious to myself that I can say I do, therefore I am conscious of no determination in me, and thus I act absolutely freely. Yeah. End quote. Author takes Kant to be here saying that self-consciousness is exhibited in certain I thoughts, those in which I ascribe the state to me. All right. This is actually in Descartes' notes. This is not, Descartes knew all of this, and he had like, apparently there's previous versions or in like other discussions where Descartes like, well, I walk, therefore I am. Or like I do other stuff, therefore I am. And he finally settled on I think, therefore I am, because of this specific self-reflexive nature of the thinking, because you can't really deny it. So, author continues though. If I did not have agency, if I was not the determining ground of my thought, I would not even be able to frame those thoughts for myself. Since I can and do frame those thoughts, I must be aware that I am such a determining ground. Together, these accounts illustrate that taking seriously Lichtenberg's challenge as a challenge for basic self-consciousness puts pressure on the first condition for practical assent. Each promised theoretical reasons for the agental claim. Does it really? Because you need more to recognize the self-reflexive nature that you are actually the person doing the speech act. Like, so if I say, I think, therefore I am, in saying that, I need to have like a reflection that I am actually saying what I'm saying and that has meaning. So there is definitely more than just the theoretical aspect to it, because to say that it is practically, to say that you are the speech act is self-verifying, and this goes back to Hinteke. He called it sui generis. These are special things that refer to themselves. That's not a theoretical thing. So if you go back to the old theory of this, Hinteke said it was sui generis. It means completely unique in these cases. I actually disagree on this point. This is why I'm harping on it. But that's the problem. It's that there's more going on in this discussion. This is a little bit not getting the full speech act theory behind it. Number 2, efectivo como tenemos eso en español, me gusta, me encanta in English. Number 2, effective me as well as we have that in Spanish. If it pleases me, it enchants me. Yeah. Doger says Dr. Samuel Johnson kicked the rock and therefore the rock is. Yeah. And that's part of the issue, is that what is actually doing the work in this inference here? Because you say, okay, in the rock in the first part, and then you're talking about the rock in the second, so you're in some sense presupposing the rock, but that doesn't guarantee existence. The existence of this stuff somehow has to be guaranteed by the speech act, saying I think, and that somehow guarantees the I am. There's more to it than just the I think. So I don't quite know if the author here has got the full theory in the background. I mean, I like their discussion, but like, there's more to this, and I do happen to know a little bit more about this than like other topics. Okay, alternative practical options, lessons from self-consciousness and the moral law. Author now turns to the second angle on this condition. Set aside what I just argued, accept that the Lichtenberg challenge is directed only towards deliberative self-consciousness, and accept that for this reason or for others, the standard modes of theoretical justification will not suffice to explain our assent to the claim that we are agents of our thinking. Hinteke was my undergraduate advisor. Yeah. Even so, I argue that the alternative modes of explanation and justification, and particularly alternative modes of practical justification, are available to us. In motivating the second condition on practical assent, Gomez appeals to a parallel between the way Kant argues we assent to the claim that God exists, and the way that he, Gomez, argues we assent to the claim that we are the agents of our thinking. One sec, someone sent... Oh, come on, Twitch. Sending me stupid messages while I'm streaming. Where was I? I lost my... Okay. Laying out these arguments reveals, I contend, that there is actually a disanalogy in their structure, and this disanalogy makes the second argument, Gomez's account of our assent to the agental claim, look much closer in structure to the form of justification that Kant takes to give us what he calls practical cognition or practical knowledge. Here is how this goes. Gomez identifies Kant's argument for God's existence as the quintessential example of an appeal to the technical notion of practical assent or faith that Gomez develops and appeals to. The argument begins from the recognition that we are subject to the moral law and proceeds on this basis. The moral law demands that we pursue the highest good, that is, we are required to set the highest good as our end. Since we only pursue ends that we take to be attainable, and since we are required to pursue the highest good, we must take this end to be attainable. Sorry about this. The only way we can take this end to be attainable is if we assent to the claim that God exists. Therefore, we must assent to the claim God exists. This claim is, Kant argues at length, theoretically undecidable. But since, as this argument shows, it is practically required, we must assent to this claim under the mode of faith, a particular sui generis holding to be true. Gomez takes there to be a parallel argument available for the agential claim. As I reconstruct it, this argument begins from the fact that we are deliberative self-conscious subjects. Being a deliberative self-conscious subject, Gomez argues, demands that we settle the question of the propriety of our perspective on the world. We are required to set this settling as our end. Since we can only pursue ends that we take to be attainable, and since we are required to settle the question of the propriety of our perspective, we must take this end to be attainable. The only way we can take this end to be attainable is if we assent to the claim that we are the agents of our thinking. Therefore, we must assent to the claim that we are the agents of our thinking. Yeah, okay, I see where they're going. This parallel is intended to show that the arguments invoke the same mode of justification. Since the agential claim is theoretically undecidable but practically required, we must assent to this claim under the mode of faith. But note that these arguments, so reconstructed, are not entirely parallel. The key difference between them is that, unlike the argument for God's existence, the argument for agential claim begins from a premise that we are deliberative self-conscious subjects that we could not recognize without already tacitly being committed to the conclusion. Lorenzen also taught BU for a bit, didn't know that. Did I know Lorenzen? No, I don't think I was there for Lorenzen. Yeah. BU has a very good philosophy department. It's a little bit, if you look at like rankings, it's not that high, but it's quite good. Depending like on what you're doing, it can be very, very good. And the people there were really solid when I was there. So like they knew a lot of stuff. They were good teachers. So didn't agree with everybody, but that's how it goes. All right, let the author spell out this analogy. While what it is to be subject to the moral law is, as Gomez nicely illustrates, tightly bound up with an appeal to an assenting God, it does not follow immediately from the recognition of the moral law that we must assent to the claim that God exists. It is instead a result of unpacking the further condition and inferences that justify the content involved in so recognizing. Contrast this to the case of deliberate self-consciousness. As Gomez defines it, deliberative self-consciousness is the recognition of the subject of your perspective as the possible agent of mental activity. Insofar as we recognize that we are deliberative self-conscious subjects, then it should follow immediately that we recognize that we must be committed to recognizing that we are the agents of our thinking. If the starting point of the argument is the fact that we are deliberative self-conscious subjects, then our assent to its conclusion is integral to get it going in the first place. The significance of this is that the justificatory structure of the argument for the agential claim bears a much closer resemblance to the form of Kant's account of the relationship between the moral law and our recognition of our freedom than it resembles his account of the relationship between the moral law and our faith in God's existence. So that's part of the issue here, is that in sort of setting up the definition of what it is to be an agent, it kind of presupposes that there is an I. And so it's already used in the argument in some sense. Kant claims that the moral law and human freedom stand in a reciprocal relationship, where the freedom is the ratio ascendi, I have no idea what ratio ascendi is, for the moral law, the means by which it can possibly obtain, and the moral law is a ratio cognoscendi for freedom, the means by which we come to be aware of our freedom. And crucially for my argument here, Kant argues that this relationship gives us what he calls practical cognition or knowledge for oneself as free. Quote, he judges therefore that he can do something because he is aware that he ought to do it and cognizes freedom within which, without the moral law, he would have remained unknown to him. Okay, end quote. What is practical cognition? Canonically, Kant distinguishes practical from theoretical cognition by claiming that the former case is one where the act of cognition actualizes its objects. That is, when we practically cognize, the existence of the cognized object depends in some way on our representation of it. Now, it is a matter of some controversy and unclarity how exactly we should understand this, but what is clear is that Kant himself takes it is a kind of distinct, it is of a kind distinct from, and perhaps more significant than, the specific and technical mode of assent and epistemic entitlement that faith captures. Making sense of the case above on this line, the recognition of the moral law gives us rational grounds to assent to the claim that we are free, not because of an end that I am required to set, but because it is immediately part of what it is to represent ourselves as governed by moral law. In so representing, I at least partially actualize this freedom, thereby cognizing it. Okay, so again, this is a very, from what I can gather from this argument, basically what's happening here is that in defining what it is for us to be an agent and like a deliberative an agent who can recognize your self-consciousness, you have already built in the self-consciousness that they want to prove. And so even by having this as a possibility, you have then created that conclusion based on the premises. It may not be obvious based on the premises, but you've already built it in some sense. That's what's going on here. And it's not that you're taking it on faith, it's that you've already constructed it. Recognizing the argument from the practical self in these terms, recognition of the fact that I am a deliberative self-conscious subject gives me rational grounds to assent to the claim that I am the agent of my thinking, not because of an end that I'm required to set, but because it is immediately part of what it is to represent myself as a deliberative self-conscious subject. In so representing, I at least partially actualize the agental nature of my thinking, thereby cognizing it. Yeah, and so according to these, according to the person they're criticizing, the author, Gomez, their own standards here, there is a theoretical way in the Kantian scheme for doing this on theory only. Authors says, I want to emphasize that I am not arguing for a view that derives the agental features of self-consciousness from the moral law and thereby results in practical knowledge. Instead, I claim that an argument to this conclusion that begins from acknowledging the fact of our deliberative self-consciousness has the same structure of epistemic justification as Kant's derivation of freedom. The grounds for justification provided by such an argumentative structure are not theoretical in the standard sense that Gomez canvasses, but nor are they a matter of faith. Instead, it is a distinct kind of practical cognition or knowledge. Especially as we, as Gomez explicitly does, take Kant and his argument seriously, this remains an explanatory option and so remains a threat to the claim that what it is to be a self-conscious subject must be to have faith in oneself as the agent of thinking, because we lack other routes by which to be entitled to this claim. Further, as I've construed the argument about end setting, this option may be a better candidate to explain the immediacy of our practical commitment to the agental claim. Even as I describe this as a threat to the claim about self-consciousness, then I take this to be friendly to Gomez's emphasis on the importance of the practical in making sense of self-consciousness. Taking seriously and integrating an analog to Kantian practical cognition means we can be committed to the role of practical reason without giving up a claim about knowledge. Yeah, I mean, so this could be fit into the overarching scheme, but it's more complicated than what Gomez said. Let me take stock. If Gomez's argument depends on the agental claim satisfying the first claim, the first condition, and that satisfaction assumes, as I contend it does, the exhaustivity of the four options I laid out as grounds for our assent, then this argument is under pressure in at least two ways. If we construe Lichtenberg's challenge as a challenge to self-consciousness generally, as I have argued we can make available theoretical grounds to support our assent. If we construe Lichtenberg's challenge as a challenge to deliberative self-consciousness, then it makes available a further form of practical epistemic justification, namely something like practical cognition. In either case, we can identify alternative grounds for assent to the agental claim. Together, these grounds motivate that this claim cannot satisfy the first condition with its demanding appeal for theoretical undecidability. Since that is one of two necessary conditions on practical assent understood as faith, the agential claim is not apt for this particular kind of assent. What's up, Energy? How you doing? Toward the end of the introduction of the practical self, Gomez notes suggestively that Kant should have taken the account of thinking self to be a matter of faith, but Kant very consciously does not extend this treatment to the thinking self and takes it that it occupies a status that is again consciously and markedly distinct from the status of our faith in God. His reasons for this are, as I have hoped to have drawn out here, at least conceptually and argumentatively distinct from his appeal to idealism. They have to do with the nature of being conscious of one's own thoughts, including thoughts about the moral law and what content is imparted in these conscious representations. Making sense of these reasons suggests a view of the self that prioritizes knowledge, either practical or theoretical, over faith as our mode of assent to the agency of our thinking. Yeah, so I agree with this author so far. The question is exactly that comes after it, though. What is to be done? This is all very negative. They're trying to show that there are further options that Gomez should have countenanced, and so Gomez's solution of their technical notion of faith is unsupported. But what actually would work here, I don't know. Okay. Can communal practices be necessary for self-consciousness? All right, so this is like going in on what Gomez's conclusion is. And like, I think this is just the last page. Yeah, so last full page basically here. That is the force of my Kantian point. Here is the force of Gomez's Kantian point. Gomez's suggestion that Kant should have treated thinking self as an object of faith is not offered in a vacuum. Kant should have extended this treatment because this faith Gomez holds is what introduces... Ivan, thank you for the raid. How was your stream? How'd it go? What were you ended up discussing about? Hope it went well. Hello. Let's give Ivan a shout out. What's up, Rex? Shout out, Ivan. How'd the stream go? What up? What up, Rex? What up, Raiders? Hi, anyone who's coming into my stream for the first time from Ivan's. I'm Noah. You can call me Noah. You can call me Noger. Call me No Gray. Or anything else, really. It doesn't matter as long as you're nice about it. Sam Stars. What's a Sam Star? Is that like someone named Sam and they have stars? Merry Christmas. Yes. Merry Christmas. Happy Solstice. I hope you're, to anyone who partakes, I hope you're having a good holiday season. Yeah. So what's up, Sam? Otherwise, the usual subjects. Cool. Yeah, if anyone doesn't know me, I'm a philosopher. I work on metaphysics, theory of knowledge, and philosophical logic. One of the things I do on stream is I read and try to explain what's going on in academic philosophy. We are reading a paper on what it is to be like, if I don't die, what it is to be an agent and how you know the I in I think, therefore I am. Happy Festivus, yes. We need feats of strength and airing of grievances. Oh, Dark Matter Star is cool. Very cool. And Sam can get the name. Yeah, that sounds like a good thing. Yes, we need, metal poles, feats of strength and airing of grievances. Absolutely. Yeah. So we just discussed how... So I know a little bit about this topic. So I think, therefore I am. Why does that seem to guarantee so strongly? Why does everyone love that statement? Be like, well, I exist. I clearly exist. Old argument against that as well. Thinking doesn't guarantee that it's you that's thinking. That may be something that may have just happened in the world and you're just in some sort of like recognition of it. They said in this paper, say, there's a bolt of lightning. You just be like, lightning, oh my God. Like, you just be like, lightning. That doesn't mean like you have the thought of like, I think that there's lightning. You're just like, lightning. Oh wow, lightning. And that's fine. Something exists. Not you. You're just like lightning. How do you get the I in that? And there's an argument to be made that like it's a speech act. When you go, I think, therefore I am, you're in thinking, I think, that is acting. And once you've got an act, that's something external in the world. And then you can be like, well, that exists. Again, that act does not guarantee that it was you that was acting. So the author here is taking someone else to task a little bit, saying you overstep the bounds. There's more ways to be like, well, how do you know it's you that's doing that thinking? So yeah. I stink, therefore I am, yeah. Vipers, that's not actually a bad position in epistemology, is that you actually only know stuff through comparison. If there's nothing to compare stuff to, then there's really no way to even judge your own self. So that's part of the issue, is that I was only acting, yeah. The reaction you get is in some sense like this sort of interactive theory, and that's not actually a bad, this is sort of a contemporary position. So no one compares to you. Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm not gonna sing. Singing is not my forte. If I want a reaction like everyone leaving, I will sing, but I don't want everyone to leave. But yeah, Ivan, as always, thank you for the raid. If you need to go do like some post-stream stuff, feel free to raid and run. Thank you. And yeah, but we were just talking about what's it called? And then, okay, so the author just finished up their argument against why the setup of this person Gomez is not. Thank you for the follow, Super Cheetah. The setup for the Gomez's argument, because they're criticizing someone named Gomez, doesn't work. But now we're getting back to what. Now we're moving on to, well, what else does Gomez say? Energy says, to my understanding, can't believe that a unified sense of self is a necessary requirement for organizing sensations, which makes sense to me. Yeah, so that was like a Kantian position, and this author Gomez is trying to do some Kantian style arguments without appealing to idealism. So that's the project here is to get the Kantian style reasoning without the Kantian style baggage. Because you don't want to be like an old school idealist, and because that doesn't really work anymore. But you still want the conclusions of Kant, that the conclusions you like at least. So like, yeah, I mean, that's right. That's kind of what's going on. But how do you do that without being an idealist like Kant was? Okay. Yeah, so this is a whole point. So there was something called objective faith, and this is kind of the thinking self is an object of faith. Faith is used in a technical sense here. It has a special definition that it's just something you need to assume to get by in your daily life. And so that's the kind of faith we're talking about here. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's basically it. So you have to assume that you exist, that there's an I, just to get by. Kant should have extended this treatment because this faith Gomez holds is what introduces our connection to the world. Quote, it is the way, he writes, in which our faith in ourselves as thinking agents is sustained by others, which shows that self-conscious subjects are related to an objective world. Isolation ends not through God or idealism, but through faith and practice, end quote. Yeah, so you see, you're not talking about God, you're not talking about idealism, but the fact that you need to have a sense of self to exist in our world, and you have to take that on faith. This takes us to the third sense of practical that I sketched at the outset, and with Gomez's move back to the world. The idea that our relation to the world is evidenced in our relation to other people and our communal practices is very compelling and explanatory rich, as is the view that our practices of being deliberative thinkers are intimately bound up with our everyday practices, and especially with our relations to other people. To conclude, then, I turn to consider the strength of the relation between our self-consciousness and our communal practices. Hey, what's up, Chocolate? Sing, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gomez argues that this relation between ourselves and our communal practices is important but contingent. It is not necessary nor required for our assent to the agental claim, but it scaffolds and sustains this assent. He acknowledges that, insofar as it is our connection between the self and the objective world, it might not be as strong as we want. The relation is helpful but not required. And that requirement, a necessary connection between the self and the world, is what we were striving for in taking up the Cartesian and Kantian mantles. Gomez ends, though, with a brief but enticing remark about the role of intersubjectivity in post-Kantian projects, sounding the call to, quote, someone inclined to these post-Kantian speculations to take this as the first step in an argument for the stronger conclusion, End quote. A thesis that exemplifies these post-Kantian speculations about community and intersubjectivity is Fichte's doctrine of the summons, in which he argues in a sentence that a condition on self-consciousness or on my awareness of myself as an individual is a summons, a demand from a rational being distinct from myself. My self-consciousness then necessarily depends on the existence of another. There is a necessary connection between the self and the world of other people. So glossed, this suggests the stronger conclusion that Gomez invites. But this Fichtean doctrine is fraught. There is difficulty in ascending to the claim that an individual is not self-conscious absent a relation to another. And this is why I was complaining about Heidegger, or this is why I mentioned Heidegger earlier, because, yeah, you have to do something different than what's in Descartes, Kant, or even Fichte, because, as they were saying, it's kind of fraught. But in Heidegger, you just don't have a self like this, and so you don't have a problem. You can say, well, it is a technical thing I'm saying, but that I exist, but it doesn't actually, the being, the real being, that's the big question. And so you don't get that just by, it's like that's the big question. What is the being? You can say we exist in the world because we are in the world of beings, but like that's not a problem. What is a human being? That's the Dasein, and that's like the whole shebang for him. But like this is like you're not going to get it this easily. Okay. Author contended that Gomez's argument offer material with which to sketch a more plausible version of this doctrine while retaining its central idea. Such a sketch must here be brief. I present it to first, just suggest a way that Gomez's argument could be developed, but second, to make available an option or the beginning of an option that preserves the importance and relevance of our practices of holding each other accountable and thinking about the nature of self and self-referring thoughts, and even if that importance is not located in their act as scaffolding for this faith. The argument I have in mind to the distinction between basic self-consciousness and deliberative self-consciousness. Deliberative self-consciousness is the recognition of your perspective and the thinking of the subject of that perspective as the possible agent of mental activity. In essence, the evaluation of your perspective. This is a higher order self-consciousness, above and beyond self-ascription, but it is the thing that is of central value to being the kind of human agents we are. Add here a suitably modified version of a summons. Deliberative self-consciousness is made possible by the practices of holding each other accountable. We come to have this capacity for self-evaluation, so this argument goes, by virtue of recognizing these practices. Our holding and being held accountable is what first takes us from mere self-ascription to full-blown evaluation. This relation to other people, in that sense, resembles the Fichtean summons specifically for deliberative self-consciousness. Following Fichte, our relation to other people, the way they hold us accountable, is a condition on this state, not just on our ascent to the state. Yeah, so the fact that people call you out and then you have to adapt to the way people call you out does imply that, okay, I have to self-reflect on what I've been doing. And that socialization presupposes that you exist in some sense. Now, again, if you're the solipsist out there, you're going to be like, well, I'm just doing this all to myself. I'm not really being called out by anyone else. But again, that still, you'd have to get this like higher level like reflection on it. So I don't know if a solipsist would buy this, but if you're going to agree that there is a social world, you do already sort of assume that there's something other than yourself out there. Okay. Author continues. There is clearly a great deal more that would need to be said if we were to take seriously this alternative argument for the role of community and self-consciousness. Absent this detail, we should hold with Gomez that this role is not necessary. Even so, we can offer some strengthening of the relation. For instance, an even further weakened summons-inspired view could allow that practices of accountability will be a condition on the deliberative self-consciousness for most people, but not all. Some people come to recognize the need for evaluation simply by pushing on the world and having it push back on them. To that extent, the relation is not strictly universal and so not necessary. But in holding that this is the way in for some, if not most people, we still get a tight and quasi-generative connection between self and practice. On this Fichtean-inspired view, I mean, I just want to be like mit das sein, being with others. Mit das sein. Heidegger had this mit das sein. Like, apologizing for yelling in German. Dojo says, is it ironic that the author refers to themselves as the author and not I? Oh, Dojo, I'm putting in the author a lot of times. They say I. I'm saying the author continues. That's me. That's a philosophy roulette-ish from me. I apologize if it was confusing you, but that's they're not speaking in the third person. I am calling them by the third person. This is one time when this is actually relevant to the paper. That like I was switching out some of the pronouns. On this Fichtean-inspired view, you see, now they went right to the we, though, which is always fun. We could get this practical commitment, the commitment to our connection to other people and their practices of holding accountable, without the commitment to faith that needs scaffolding. In that case, absent the satisfaction of the first condition, and so absent the practical assent and faith that it engenders, we can arrive at the valuable conclusion that Gomez leads us to in the practical self, of the importance of community, and particularly of a community that challenges and questions each other. Vipers does not believe in pronouns. What about you? Yeah. I mean, that's the, it's like, yeah, a little bit self-defeating. Oh, and that was it. Okay, that was it. I thought there was another thing down here, but, Haley Brennan is a Bursaw faculty fellow. Okay, so they're visiting in NYU at this point. Okie dokie, but that was it for this one. Thank you all for sticking around. Thank you for the raid. Thou, thee, thy. Yeah, exactly. So you're not gonna. I love people that like, I don't believe in pronouns. What about you? It's like, yeah. But anyway, if you're here now, you get to rate the paper. You rate the paper by spamming some emotes in chat. You can see them below here, and you can see them next to me here. Spelling and capitalization do count. So if you thought this was fun and made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. If you thought this talked about existential or artistic drama, give it a scream, a nog scream. For Ouroboros, for deep or ancient ideas, that's the Nog Oro. Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. I think I'm going to give this a Nog Knife. A Nog Navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You could also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, or my vote meh. Note anything in the green makes the overall score go up, anything in the red makes an overall score go down, because I do calculate an overall score, and the vote meh makes everything go towards the middle. So, what do you think about this paper? I thought this was kind of fun. I thought it was done. Yeah, done well. I can't speak, of course, anymore. A brain dance from Dojo Drummer. I think that's fair. Like, it gave some ideas to think about. Like, how do we actually argue for, your existence? Thinking of, like, certain examples. Like, I think, therefore I am. Or some other things in the neighborhood. Nog Meow? Yeah, maybe I should have one. Well, you thought it was just sort of like a kitty cat one, Ra? I mean, it's not a bad idea. Which is crazy because I hate these types of arguments. Well, Dojo, this was a takedown argument. So it wasn't arguing specifically for the stuff I know you dislike, but it was taking down another viewpoint. So in some sense, it was a negative argument, maybe in line with some of the stuff you might appreciate. So yeah. But I agree, though. They did a good job. Like, I thought they did a good job sort of explaining what was going on. I did put a little bit of work in, I think, to explain the Kantian stuff and the Cogito stuff. But, yeah. No matter how much you try, you cannot focus it. That's fine. You don't need, like, it happens. Like, it happens. Like, that's fine. It happens. I mean, I am far from sober some days, and I really cannot concentrate. I'm like, I'd love to say some more sensible stuff in chat, but, yeah, it's not always gonna happen, and that's okay. Yeah, so I'm gonna give it a knife. I thought they presented some rather sophisticated argumentation. They regenerated some Kantian structures that were apparently present in Gomez's book to show that, like, okay, if this is the structure of the Gomez argument, then it's not exactly like they reconstructed their argument and showed, okay, this is their Kantian style argument, but not the Kantian style conclusion that came from it. So like, oops, sorry. So I like that takes some effort to be able to put these sorts of things together. That's why I'm giving it a knife over here. They also didn't overstate their claims. They said, look, I'm going to argue against what Gomez is saying. They didn't try to do too much there also. So it's like it didn't like, overshoot. Again, maybe not the craziest best paper. Like you have to be interested in this stuff, but also it's like, all right, look at it. It's not bad. Doga says it wasn't a straight takedown. It gave some paths to solutions. Yeah. So they were looking at this and saying, look, there's more to this argument. That's right. But yeah, if anyone else has anything else to say or wants to get some ranking in, please do so. Yeah, like I said, this stuck pretty not carefully. It stuck pretty good to the Kantian style arguments that Gomez was using. Like I said, the arguments in the sort of modern era that I know, going back to like speech acts and like say, okay, in saying I think, you are actively doing that action or speech or whatever you want to call it. And that's what's guaranteeing those acts that they're self-reflective. If even understanding their meaning, then you know what you're saying as you're saying it. That makes it special. And that also is why the arguments here were a little shaky, is because, they didn't have the whole I think therefore I am. It's not like we have a definitive account of that. And so using that as an argument is actually a little suspicious. You can't just use the cogito ergo sum as a premise for the rest of what you want to say. And so that's why there's some like difficulty here in the setup of this argument for faith as Gomez wants it.